welcome back to PJ Takes 5. We're going to get right into it here. So first up, the MLB All-Star break. Tonight, Monday night, was the Home Run Derby. So Cal Raleigh, aka Big Dumper, is the 2025 Home Run Derby champion. Pretty big milestone and an already historic season for the Mariner. He becomes the second player in franchise history, alongside just Ken Griffey Jr., to win the Home Run Derby. And Griffey did it 3 times already, so definitely got a lot of work cut out for him to catch up to Griffey Jr. there, but good start already. Like I said, big season right now. He's got 38 home runs, currently leading MLB. That's the second most before an All-Star break ever, just behind Barry Bonds, and the most for a switch hitter before an All-Star break by I think 9 homers. So first catcher ever to win the award or to win the Derby. So kind of knocking down accolades left and right. A couple of really cool moments for Raleigh tonight. His father, Todd, pitched to him, and his younger brother, Todd Jr., caught. So I saw afterwards that he mentioned that Todd Jr., his younger brother, who I think is 15 going on 16, might end up with a new car. I think Raleigh earned $1 million for the win tonight. So a chunk of that might go to the kid, and then whenever you get a father or an older guy pitching, which is pretty common, just kind of monitoring like how the pitches are coming in throughout the night. Felt like he started to miss the strike zone a little bit more as the night went on, just getting the arm tired, but still a really cool moment to win a really big event like that, with family around. So but it was almost all for naught because Raleigh barely made it out of the first round. He tied with Brent Rooker for 17 homers, but it came down to who had the longest drive in that first round, and the Big Dumper won by 0.08 feet they put on the broadcast. So if you do the math, that's less than an inch. So just because it ended up being so important and Cal Raleigh won the event, you would kind of think maybe doing some sort of sudden death hit off would be better than just saying, okay, this guy had a 1 inch longest home run. So that was a little disappointing. And then I think, just as it is a conversation almost every year, just the format in general is always a little confusing. There's a lot of numbers and colors and stuff they put on the broadcast there, and sometimes it feels like even the guys calling it are a little out of sorts. So I know they kind of changed it a while back with the whole 10 out rule. So I don't know what the answer is really, but felt like it was pretty close to being understandable and palatable this year, but still a couple missteps, and definitely that tiebreaker probably needs to change going into the future, especially just since Raleigh was a beneficiary of that and ended up winning. So it ended up being a pretty important part of it all. And then some other big moments. O'Neal Cruz, the Pirates outfielder, hit a 513-foot homer, which was the longest of the night, and I think one of the longest over the past decade. That didn't happen in 2021 when they were in Colorado, and obviously the thin air there kind of helps the ball drive out. So definitely just got a hold of the ball, and a big moment for a guy who made it fairly far and is a younger name in the game. So good to see him, him kind of get elevated. One of the stars on that Pirates team who's really struggling kind of alongside Paul Skeens. So that was a big moment. And then in the final, Junior Caminero, who ended up losing, but they have the kids in the outfield kind of shagging the balls basically, and a kid jumped up at the fence and robbed Caminero of a homer. So the refs ended up counting it, but it was still a really kind of funny moment on the broadcast, just for them to all kind of zone in on this kid who, was just kind of doing what was natural to him by making a play in the outfield. So, Home Run Derby, Cal Raleigh is our 2025 champion, and then the other part of the All-Star break that's happened is just the draft. So that started Sunday and then went into Monday. I don't think a lot of people follow the draft. It's definitely not the event that it is for the NFL or the NBA, where you're getting people who are really gonna contribute in a really meaningful way. Just with so many minor teams, and farm system players in the MLB, the draft is more of like an asset management kind of thing, which, you know, it's tough when you're talking about people and players and referring to them as assets. But, you know, a lot of these guys past the first handful of picks seem to be more about, can we turn this player into, you know, a big leaguer down the line via trade or transaction, rather than like their development necessarily. So that being said, just still wanted to go over a couple of like the bigger names. So the first overall pick with the Nationals, who had just fired their general manager, they ended up selecting Eli Willits, a shortstop not out of Oklahoma. He's committed to Oklahoma, where he's going to join his brother Jackson. But, you know, kind of a surprise first overall pick. Still a kid from a baseball family, kind of like Ethan Holiday, who I think people thought might be the first overall pick. But Willits, like I said, his brother's already at Oklahoma, and he'll be joining him there. And then his father, Reggie, was a big leaguer himself, played 6 seasons with the Angels, and then was on the Yankee staff, and is now currently the associate head coach for Oklahoma. So definitely kind of a boomer sooner baseball family there. Fast forward to the third overall pick, the Mariners selected Cade Anderson, pitcher out of LSU. You know, dominant player for that College World Series team. He had the shutout in their first game victory in the World Series against Coastal Carolina. So, you know, super big when they needed him. And then he led all of Division I last season with 180 strikeouts and just 119 innings. So pretty projectable starting pitcher that, going back to the home run derby, should be, you know, throwing balls to Cal Raleigh pretty soon here. And then with the fourth overall pick, the Rockies selected infielder Ethan Holiday, who, like I said, I think a lot of people were thinking might be the first overall pick, might be the second overall pick. Another guy from a baseball family. He's a younger brother of Jackson Holiday, who was the first overall pick 3 years ago with the Orioles. And then his father, Matt Holiday, was also drafted by the Rockies. So that's obviously a really cool storyline for both the father and son to go to the same team. But Matt Holiday, kind of more known as a Cardinal, won the World Series with them. And then of his 7 All-Star nominations, the majority came with the Cardinals. So, and then also Ethan's uncle and Matt's brother, Josh, not quite as successful as a player, but has been Oklahoma State's head coach since 2013. So that's kind of like some of the 3 bigger names. And then just going to my Cubs, they got outfielder Ethan Conrad, 17th overall. A guy who transferred to Wake Forest after a big 2024 season at Marist, where he led Division I with 13 triples, I guess 4 of which came in the same game. So obviously a pretty crazy outing. But just another big outfielder who, you know, might be a bat. I know they got Owen Casey on the Iowa Cubs right now, and a lot of people are clamoring for him to be called up. So just another outfield back, and you kind of have to think, is this insurance for, you know, if they move Hap at some point, does Kyle Tucker not re-sign? But no matter what happens, and obviously hopefully they can retain Tucker and Hap, unless, you know, Hap is part of like some really crucial non-rental trade down the stretch here. But it seems like they got some good outfielder depth and might have to move some pieces around to get their full kind of advantage out of that. So moving on down the list here, we got NFL wide receivers in the news. So we'll start off with San Francisco 49ers receiver Juwan Jennings. He kind of released that he wants a new contract or a trade, which kind of makes sense. He's currently set to earn $7.5 million, which is obviously a lot of money for a normal person, but not a huge NFL contract. And that's part of the last year of a 2-year extension he signed last offseason. So just wanted to get, you know, more security going forward. He had a career year last year. Had the most catches in his career with 77, most yards with 975, and touchdowns with 6. So kind of a breakout season for a former 7th rounder. And then, you know, I know with the Niners they say it's 3rd and Juwan, and he's a big part of their kind of like outside zone scheme running plays, and they view him as a big running asset. So kind of like a guy that I think does a lot of stuff for Shanahan's offense that they want to be doing, but you know, it's now the second offseason in a row that the Niners have had a big time a contributing receiver kind of demand either a new contract or a trade or something, right? Because they had that Brandon Ayuk saga last year, which if that tells them anything about how to handle this Jauan Jennings situation, it probably makes sense to do this sooner rather than later, just because the Brandon Ayuk thing kind of went all the way up to the start of the season, and then he ended up getting hurt, and he had like a really bad statistical year compared to what he's used to. I think he had, over his career, the fewest games played, receptions, receiving yards, touchdowns, first downs, and yards per game. So all in all, just a really down year. And obviously the Niners had a lot of problems last season, but they've now traded Debo, and Ayuk's looking to come back, but with Jennings and then Ricky Pearsall is kind of like the only other receiver of like big notoriety in there, who, just because he was a first rounder a couple years ago, it might make sense just for them to kind of say, okay, we'll get Jennings done here, kind of knowing that, the Trent Williams and the Christian McCaffreys, and they got some older players that might be on the back end, and they might not get new contracts. So I would just go ahead and do that. And then speaking of receiver contracts, the Jets signed Garrett Wilson to a 4-year, $130 million contract that has $90 million guaranteed. So looking at that 130 number, that puts him at the 4th highest paid receiver in the NFL. Since joining the NFL in 2022, he has the 10th most receiving yards, with a little bit over 3,000, and that's really impressive considering he hasn't had a lot of consistency at the quarterback position. 6 different guys have thrown him balls. Mostly it's been Zach Wilson and Aaron Rodgers, both about like a full season there. But then stints with Mike White, Joe Flacco, Trevor Siemian, and Tim Boyle. So not amazing quarterback play to work with, and he's obviously had a pretty productive start to his career. And he's played in all 51 games that the Jets have had over that time. They haven't made the playoffs, so super reliable player, definitely a leader, first round pick for them. So they locked him down, and then you'd assume that at least Sauce Gardner. I know they also got Jermaine Johnson in that first round, but you'd think Sauce Gardner is probably kind of the next in line for those guys. But with Justin Fields coming to town and they're not paying him a whole lot, it makes sense to lock down their guy at receiver. And then last receiver in the news, Mike Williams for the Chargers, was placed on the physically unable to perform list. So he's had an undisclosed injury since minicamp, and I know injuries have kind of been a thing throughout his career. But reuniting with the Chargers there, he started his career there, played 7 seasons, and then was there when Herbert got drafted, and had averaged a little over 900 yards per season in his first few seasons with Herbert there. So hopefully he can get back to being healthy and bring some relief to that receiving room that kind of seemed to struggle outside of Ladd McConkey. So if he can be full go by the start of the year or early on, I don't think there's any debate that Herbert's one of the more talented quarterbacks in the NFL. So getting him a big jump ball receiver is kind of unlocking a part of his game that he hasn't really had since Mike Williams left. So we'll see. We'll see if the big receiver can get healthy there. Moving down the list, we got Cooper Flagg, who finished his second game in the summer league and has already announced that he's going to be shut down until the regular season starts, which makes sense. The kind of like the unanimously considered first overall pick heading into the draft. He didn't have to prove a whole lot. Obviously, they're not going to cut him or trade him or anything. So he had a pretty rocky start in his first game against the Lakers. I know it was the whole like Cooper Flagg versus Bronny storyline, and tickets ended up being I think the most expensive for a summer league game ever. So in that game he had 10 points, 6 boards, and 4 assists. They ended up winning, but obviously not like a great stretch, even though he had a big block down the stretch to kind of help them out, and then was making some big assists and kind of moving the ball for that kind of dynamic wing that he is. But then they played the Spurs, obviously like the matchup between 1 and 2 with Flagg, and then the Spurs, Dylan Harper, and he played a lot better. Flagg did. So 31 points and 4 boards. They lost the game, but that doesn't really matter at this point. So the Mavericks staff kind of saw all they needed to see and pulled the plug and said, we'll see you, come the regular season. So just looking at that Mavericks roster, they're in a pretty interesting spot. Obviously, Kyrie, he had the ACL tear last season, so he's probably not going to be back until maybe like January, February 2026. So they're going to start the season without him. But still, the starting lineup will be D'Angelo Russell, Klay Thompson, Cooper Flagg, Anthony Davis, and then one of Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively. And then, you'll have the other center off the bench, PJ Washington, Caleb Martin, Najee Marshall, Max Christie, and then once Kyrie does get healthy, D'Lo will kind of move into that like off the bench 1-2 guard combo guard. So pretty interesting squad. I know the kind of other younger player rookie that people have an eye on is Ryan Nembhard, who the younger brother of Andrew Nembhard, who's a guard with the Pacers, and also in a similar situation where kind of like Kyrie, Halliburton's going to be out. Andrew Nembhard, Ryan Nembhard, they both might see a bigger role, just kind of helping command the offense in some capacity. For Ryan Nembhard on the Mavs, it would be, maybe as that like third point guard. But he's been playing pretty well, 21 points, 5 assists in his last game, and then struggled shooting the ball in his first game, which was 2 points on 1 for 10, but he had 7 assists too, so kind of getting that understanding of how to play off certain people. And it's just one of those things where if you're a rookie guard and you can play well with Flagg, who's obviously a big investment for them, that might be a good way to see the court. So the Mavs have been obviously in the spotlight since the Luka trade last season, and Nico Harrison is Kyle Lowry trade is obviously because a lot of people questioned that process, but it helps that they were kind of gifted that first overall pick. But that roster is actually looking pretty formidable, and as long as they can kind of tread water until Kyrie gets back, they could be a real contender in the West. So we'll see what happens there. The big three of Cooper Flagg, Kyrie, and AD is certainly an intriguing one. And moving on down, we got Ryan Poles of the Bears signing an extension that keeps him as the GM through the 2029 season. So that aligns him up with Ben Johnson, who they obviously signed this past offseason. I don't think there's a lot of pushback on this idea. I mean, they haven't had a great record, obviously, 15-36. Since Poles has taken over. Obviously, he inherited a pretty rocky team and then kind of stripped away a lot of the players. Even at that, right, getting rid of Roquan and then David Montgomery and Robert Quinn, who had like the most sacks by a Bear ever, and then immediately got traded. So not the most team success under Poles, but in terms of personnel moves, some pretty noteworthy moments. Obviously, the big trade was when they traded away the first overall pick that became Bryce Young, and in return, they got a bunch of players. Offensively, they got Caleb, DJ Moore, Darnell Wright, Luther Burden, and then Tyrese Stevenson on defense, and even a big special teamer in Torrey Taylor. So to turn that first overall pick into, a quarterback, 2 receivers, and a tackle, and then a corner and a punter, impacting all 3 phases of the game, I'd say that's pretty good. Definitely a couple negatives. I know there's kind of talk about not finding a lot of value in the later rounds. I pumped the brakes on that just a little bit because it's so rare for a 5th, 6th, 7th round pick to become something right away, and usually it takes a little bit of time. So like take a guy like Terrell Smith, who I think was a 6th round pick out of Minnesota there at corner or DB. Has played more corner than anything else, but he was even pretty good last year, and I'm sure as he continues with his new staff, he'll in downtown he'll get even better. But it's hard to judge a 6th round corner in his first year or two just because he has to kind of earn that position on the team and on the depth chart. So I'm not too concerned about those late round selections. We'll kind of see how those pan out more. For me, the sense of kind of like, not nepotism, because that's like too strong a word, but just kind of favor picks, quote unquote, that's a little worrisome. I know Kiran Amagaji, who, kind of like I'm saying, he's still writing his story there, and he's going to get a lot better than what we saw last year. But kind of the whole story about them finding him and picking him related to POLES and Eberflus, who was the coach at the time, golfed at a country club that Amagaji's dad like worked at or owned, and they kind of had these like joking conversations like, yeah, we'll draft your kid. So that was a little weird. Like, did you draft this guy because you really believe in his abilities or because of a personal relationship? And kind of same with Ozzy Trapillo, who it looks like, could easily be a starter this year, depending on kind of the Braxton Jones situation. But, he's a BC kid, and POLES went to BC, and I guess their dads played together at BC. So it's kind of that whole conversation of like, even if you liked him, was part of the grade just kind of like, we like him, and then he's also a BC guy, or was he able to kind of remove himself from that conversation? So that's my only real negative with him. I think he's done a pretty good job of building his team up. I know a lot of people want to point to like, oh, but he traded like, a second round pick that ended up being the 32nd overall pick for Chase Claypool. That was also at a time when Bears had like nobody at receiver, and so I'd rather have a guy who's like willing to take a shot even if it's wrong. And to his credit, I think of both Claypool and Velus Jones, where it's like he didn't hold on to them longer than he had to. Really, he kind of saw pretty early like, okay, I invested a second and third round pick in either of those guys, and it's not going to work out. Instead of just trying to make it work and give these guys every single chance, I'm just going to cut bait and move on. And that's a really hard thing to do that I don't think a lot of NFL GMs or coaches or decision makers are really comfortable doing. So, kind of being able to say, hey, I was wrong, and that's okay. That's a good thing. None of these guys are going to shoot 100%. So I'm pretty happy they extended him. I'm happy they extended him not in secret and actually got the report out there. Because I know that had been a thing, kind of in general in Chicago sports, of just like secret extensions going on. So I'm glad they're being forthright with it. I'm glad he's lined up with Ben Johnson, who seemed to kind of like select him and approve him as saying like, I'm okay with going to a team where Ryan Poles is. And I'm happy for Caleb Williams, because obviously now he kind of has that stability of he doesn't have to play with the pressure of, hey, I might get, my grown adult GM fired if we don't play well. So everything's kind of smoothed out now, and they can kind of all go into the season with that kind of off their back. So that's good. And then last topic, another NFL topic, just Teddy Bridgewater was in the news here. Former NFL quarterback, and he's currently the head coach at Miami Northwestern, which is his alma mater high school, but he was actually suspended by the school for paying for rides, meals, and recovery services for student athletes last season. A pretty interesting story. So he basically admitted to paying for these services, and was trying to outsource some of the costs to fan base, the fan base and boosters and whatever. And it's kind of a tricky conversation of, is it by the book correct? Probably not, but he's probably also doing the right thing. I saw U.S. News list the school lists that 75% of the student body is economically disadvantaged in some capacity. So, to be able to use all the money you've earned in the NFL and apply that to trying to make the lives of young student athletes who are in the shoes that he was in, it's really hard to knock a guy like that. So, he was Bridgewater becoming the coach there last season. He led them to a 3A state championship in Florida. So definitely seems to be doing a good job. I'm sure, on the field, but also kind of in the locker room and helping these guys out. And then, last season when he helped the team win the title, he actually ended up rejoining the Detroit Lions as a backup quarterback once that season was over and heading into the playoffs. So, in terms of what's next for Bridgewater, I don't know if they'll try to appeal this decision to get him back coaching. I know he had mentioned that he might end up trying to find a loophole and become a volunteer coach, that he doesn't have to be suspended because he won't be a technical employee. the sneaky thing that I think about, he is only 32, and he's obviously a really good dude, and has been through a lot with that nasty knee injury he had in his last year in Minnesota there. So I wouldn't be super surprised if he tried to make a comeback. Just as kind of like a veteran presence in some quarterback room. So let's see, he's already played for 6 teams: the Vikings, the Saints, the Lions, the Panthers, Broncos, and Dolphins. The one that sticks out to me there is the Vikings. I'm sure he doesn't have a lot of connections with either Kevin O'Connell or their GM up there, Adolfo Mensa, but with J.J. McCarthy, going through his own injury kind of process and coming back, and they don't really have a veteran, and I know that Kirk is always kind of tossed around as like, could he come back and back up JJ and be like a veteran, but it kind of makes sense for Bridgewater to be at least considered for that role. When you look back at it, I think Bridgewater and JJ are the last 2 quarterbacks to be drafted in the first round by the Vikings. Obviously, a decade apart, but still there's some carryover there with that experience of being drafted by the team and then the injury side of it. So that'd be kind of a cool, way to kind of supplement the potential time lost with being suspended by the team there. So that's just something I'm kind of keeping my eye on. I think Bridgewater is like a very well-respected player, and veteran player at that. So tough situation being suspended. I'm sure he's doing a lot of good things down there, and it'd be good to see him back either at the high school or in the NFL. So rounding out our rundown here, we got our media review. So like I said, tonight's Monday night. So Sunday night, I watched the movie Idiocracy on Hulu, a movie that I had seen bits of, but I don't think I had seen like the whole thing sitting down in one shot. So really good. I'm a big Mike Judge fan, Beavis and Butthead and King of the Hill, and the voices, all that stuff is pretty good. So he's really funny, and then obviously they got like a really good cast. Luke Wilson, Maya Rudolph, Terry Crews, and Dak Shepard are kind of the more main characters, and then they've got a good cast of like cameos and smaller characters with Justin Long and David Herman, who played Michael Bolton in Office Space, which I think Mike Judge also did. They got Andrew Wilson in there as, I think his name is Beef Supreme, at the end there when they're in like the gladiator kind of fighting ring, and obviously he's Luke Wilson's brother, so that makes sense. And then Thomas Hayden Church is in there as the Brawno CEO, which is kind of like just like the Gatorade brand there. And then Tom Kenny is in there, I think in an uncredited role as the Carl's Jr. machine, and then Shia LaBeouf, also in an uncredited role, is in there at the beginning as like an army trainee. So definitely an interesting movie, definitely a pretty poignant movie considering everything that's going on. Obviously, like the reliance on technology is a pretty big part of this movie, and kind of a ongoing discussion in real life with AI and social media and everything. So kind of seeing, I think this movie came out in 2005, so just kind of seeing how some of those critical evaluations of then modern society are kind of starting to pan out is definitely a little scary and a little scarily accurate. And then I just really like the kind of general feel of the movie. It's an hour and 20 minutes. It's like a late night comedy kind of movie, and it just seems to be a thing that's not, a type of movie that's not really made anymore. And that's really, kind of sad, because I think there's like a big market for that kind of stuff. Really just goofy movie, doesn't take up a lot of time, something easy to watch on like a Friday, Saturday, Sunday night. So yeah, and then just my kind of 2 notes. I got a plot hole. So Luke Wilson and Maya Rudolph get sent into the future, and they're trying to get back somehow, and they run into Dak Shepard, who's just like a complete moron, right? and they're trying to get Dax Shepard to take them to a time machine, which ends up just being like a carnival ride. So it's, there's always kind of the idea of like, why do they even believe him from the get-go that there was a real time machine? Just seeing how stupid he is and how stupid people have become. So that was like my only like critique. And then I thought the funniest part, they put Luke Wilson into like a machine where he has to identify himself, because they do like the tattoo of like a barcode on your wrist so you can pay for something by just scanning your wrist. And they put him in the machine because he doesn't have that because he's from the past. And it's some robot that's kind of like doing the, all right, say, at the beep, say your first name and last name. And if anybody has ever had to call, an automated line for like a doctor's appointment or something, or to pay a bill, or, just that whole process of saying yes, and then the computer or, the phone not knowing that you're saying yes is just so frustrating. So when Luke Wilson goes in the machine, he ends up messing it up, and the computer says that his name's not sure. And then the computer's like, can you confirm that your first name is not? And then he's like, no, it's not. And it's like, oh, thank you. We now know that it's not. So that's definitely like a frustrating part that, aged pretty well in this kind of like prediction of like what was going to happen. So definitely a fun movie. It's on Hulu. That's where I watched it. I'm sure it's elsewhere. But definitely one that kind of holds up and has a different meaning in 2025. So that's it here. We got through all the topics pretty clean here. Trying to keep these close to or under 30 minutes as we go forward. So yeah, we'll see you guys Friday with a new episode, and hopefully it's a little better. Thanks.